So our next speaker, so I'll make sure I get all the details right, has a 13-year-old houseplant that was given to him by the mother of a man he wrote a story about who got beaten up in the street by his own lawyer. So everyone please welcome Gary.
My name is Gary Harki. I am the investigations editor for Bloomberg Law. I am not a programmer. I am a journalist, but I've worked in local newsrooms, and I've joked many times that I'm usually the person who knows more about data than anybody else in the newsroom. Not so much now. We have great actual data people, but in a lot of places it's been a situation where in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man was king, and I was the one-eyed man. So what I'm going to walk you through a little bit today is how to request data from the government, how to get it, when you might need to sue them, which happens not all that infrequently. So a couple of things to think about before you file a request. The first thing you want to do is just ask for the data. Sometimes it's online, or governments will just kind of give it to you. You don't always have to go through the process of formally filling out a Freedom of Information Act request and sending it along. But and also it just sort of helps to have them kind of know a little bit about what you're looking for. And keep in mind that FOIA is a particular process. It's a little bit technical know-how, a little bit public relations, persistence, and a little bit like practicing law. So kind of to get us started here, many of you probably understand this better than me, but just so we're on the same page, documents equal data. If you find a form online or something that somebody has to fill out, probably there's a data set that includes all the answers to that form. Keep in mind that most often when dealing with government agencies, the first person you're going to talk to is probably going to know less about data than you. It's a public information officer. That depends. Federal agencies are better than state agencies, but a lot of times you need to kind of remember that the first person is probably gonna need to talk to somebody else. So a grizzled reporter friend of mine once told me that requesting data and using FOIA requests is like practicing law without a license, and it really is. And the thing to think about when you're filling out forms or when you're writing your requests and as you go through the process is that to document sort of everything as you go, because you never know when you may need to show that to other government officials or put it before a judge, and you want to have clear documentation of your interactions with the agency. So what to ask for? I mentioned already forms, anything online that's filled out, there's a database somewhere. Records retention schedules, which can kind of act as a menu for the data that that exists in various agencies. Contracts with third-party vendors. This is a thing I've kind of come to realize over time, that like a lot of government agencies, they contract out part of their data work to a third-party vendor. You may not know exactly what fields are in a database from that, but you can look online and find out an awful lot about how they keep their data just by searching contracts, and even like this kind of the advertising information from those vendors. And then also obviously schema or data dictionaries. A lot of times that's good to kind of request even before you really know what you want to request, just to kind of get a layout of the data and see what it is, because it's very hard sometimes. For me as a journalist, I know what I want. I want to know, I don't know, COVID data. I want to know how many people got vaccines in a specific area or something like that. But I don't know what fields they keep. And if I get that, I can figure that out pretty easy. So moving on. And then know the law that's involved. And there's really kind of two parts to this. Know what FOIA laws apply. So for instance, there's a federal FOIA law. Every state has FOIA laws. Some local jurisdictions will have their own peculiarities on how they deal with FOIA. So you really kind of want to look at the law as it's constructed in the jurisdiction at which you're going to be requesting information. And so for instance, Virginia in particular, if you look at just their basic law, it looks great. It looks like you're going to be able to get any data you want. But what Virginia has done over time is they have put in a lot of different exemptions for different types of things. And a lot of them are what I would call optional exemptions. So they could say, okay, I'm going to, I as an agency can give you this data, or I might decide that, in this case, it's not proper to give it. It puts it on the agency to decide. And when that happens, often what happens is that the agency decides never to release the data. And the reason is often because they make the rationale that if they release it once, they have set a precedent, and then they're going to have to release it again. So dig into to at least the FOIA law part of it and look through it, see what exemptions you're going to be running into, and try to maybe, work with, sometimes you can get a lawyer to work with you, or people that are more experienced in FOIA requests, and kind of see what you can work out to kind of at least hedge that off even in your initial request. The other part is to read through the state code or federal code governing your agency. That's not, you don't have to read through every piece of it every time, but like a lot of times you can find out just specific data that is kept just from that is required to be kept in state code. So that's another a good way to kind of both understand the agency that you're requesting info from, and then also what they might keep. So writing a request, this is where the practicing law thing really applies. You need to tailor your request to the jurisdiction that you're requesting information from, again, through kind of looking through the law. But you can also often like keep the language simple around the request. It depends upon what agency you're dealing with in terms of exactly how elaborately you want to go. But there's resources out there for writing requests for local and state agencies in particular. I would always go to the Student Press Law Center letter generator. And what this does is it just gives you a format, and you say, okay, I'm requesting information from Texas. I want, you kind of write in what the information that you want is. And then it puts all the legal language that applies to that state based on its FOIA request or FOIA law in there for you. And then federal agencies, the National Freedom of Information Coalition has a pretty good kind of, there's no real good generator anymore. There used to be a really great one, but I think it's since died. But the FOIA Wiki and the National Freedom of Information Coalition have some pretty great tools to kind of help you. And then also federal agencies, a lot of times you can go to the website, you may have to fill out, some basic info, but you can just, there's like a portal where you just kind of put your request in, they email you a response, and it's sometimes much more simple even than state agencies. So, and this thing here, this is from the FOIA generator I was talking about, and that's just where you've got your state there. There's a bunch of other stuff up and down, but like basically you just put the information in that you're requesting. But a good request is going to kind of weigh how specific you want to get, because you're basically balancing being so specific that you run into privacy laws and being so broad that you run into the argument that it's going to take too long to get you the information, or it's too big of a request. That shouldn't be as much of an issue with data, but it often is. So you really kind of have to weigh that based on what you want. You're going to end up occasionally running into HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is a nice warm blanket, particularly for state government officials, to wrap all of their data in and keep it from the public. There are obviously like valid reasons for HIPAA, but it gets thrown out for literally anything that touches healthcare, certainly in local and state agencies. So also, this is probably like obvious to the people in this room, but just to say it, ask for a CSV or other machine readable format. If you want to like hear, if you want to see me start ranting in a newsroom, like send me a PDF when you have a CSV file. Like that happens all the time, and it's kind of crazy. And it doesn't even like normally stop us because we can, convert it. But it's a common thing that happens when you're requesting information. So eventually, if you are requesting information, you are going to run into somebody like this guy. And what I mean by that is that the first person you talk to is often a public information officer who understands data less than I do and doesn't really know what you're looking for. Federal agencies are better. Obviously, they handle this all the time. State agencies, I sometimes think it's like willful ignorance, that they want somebody that is a wall between you and the data that you're trying to get. So what you usually end up doing, again, hopefully you've already kind of asked for the information informally. And then, I often would send the request and then just follow it up with a phone call and be like, hey, can we get your data guy on the phone and like just settle this pretty quickly? And it's probably some of you in this room that I want to talk to. But that's like a really important part of it, is getting to the person who knows how the data is actually stored and kept. I had a case one time where the state police in West Virginia, I was trying to get the concealed weapons permits for the state. I just wanted to see who had concealed weapons permits. There was no law preventing us from getting that, but the state police claimed that they could not give us this information. And it wasn't that they didn't want to give us the information, it was that it was in a system so old that they did not know how to extract it. So, and it was literally, this was like 10 years ago, but it was like from the 80s that they had all of this on. And I went round and round with them. Another reporter got involved. We eventually had to call like the governor's press secretary and get her involved. And essentially what we had to do was get from them the software and hardware they were using. And then we took that and we put it on a listserv of journalists at Investigative Reporters and Editors called the NICAR listserv. And somebody on there, we explained what was going on, was immediately outraged and wrote exactly what we needed to do to get the data from that system, which we then took back to the state police and said, here's how to do your job. And they did it. So that, and that actually never even resulted in a story in the end, but like we got the data at any rate. That happens not infrequently, where you're like, fight for data and then like, well, there wasn't the story there that I thought there was. So after filing your request, you want to keep track of the deadlines for the agency to respond to you. 20 working days for federal, that's around the time for other agencies. And then this is one that's really important, is memorialize all of your communications with agencies about your request. I often, like if I have what I would consider a bad actor, an agency that I think is just like trying to avoid giving me anything, I have just refused to even get on the phone with them. I want everything in writing. I want everything in email, because I know that I might end up in a legal battle with them, and I want to make sure that I have everything memorialized. So keep that in mind as you kind of write these. And if they call you, I would immediately, when the call is over, write out an email, send it back to them, say, hey, this is what we talked about on the phone. This is what was said. If you disagree, let me know. But this is what my recollection from the conversation. Oh, and also keep your correspondence all together. Don't lose track of it. Put it in a separate folder, either physical or digital, so that you know where everything is. Now, when the answer is no, the first thing you want to do is appeal. Appealing allows you, it preserves your right to sue. So you don't have to like worry about, well, you can sue them later if you decide to. You also kind of you want to study the response, look and see if there is a privacy exemption. Generally, they require you to show your work or to show how you're releasing information and how the information would shed light on the government, and that's sort of like the onus is on you to prove that. And then you also have foreseeable harm, which is sort of on the government to determine why releasing this information may be harmful to the public, individuals, whoever. And then also, it's not hard to find a lawyer that will like pay attention to a good FOIA request. There's a lot of the the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press is good with federal FOIAs. And then the Virginia Coalition for Open Government is great in Virginia to at least help you work out like what exemptions they're citing and what they might mean. And generally every state has some organization like that. And a thing to keep in mind is that lawyers can recoup fees from these. So it's not the hardest thing in the world to get a lawyer to take one of these cases, because if they win, then they can recoup fees from the government and you don't end up paying anything. So then this is my final slide, when to sue for information. Again, lawyers can recoup fees. So getting them to talk about it and getting, say, your newsroom, which may or may not have a whole lot of resources to get to a lawyer, isn't always as hard as you would think. I know people think local news and journalism is not in the greatest place, and in some ways it's not, but also like it's not that hard to find to kind of pursue some of these things even today. If an agency, so when to sue is really kind of like weighing a couple of factors. And I've been involved in I've had 3 of my requests end up in a FOIA suit and been involved in a couple of others through Bloomberg. And it's really kind of weighing a couple of things. Is the agency, routinely not responding to information? If that starts happening, I start looking for a really good FOIA request that I think we can win on to sue them, because at some point you end up just sort of in a place with some of these agencies where they're just not responsive to FOIA. They make the calculation that a lot of FOIAs get filed and then nobody follows up on them. And often when you show them that, yes, in fact, I will follow up on this and track it down, then that changes the equation for them. Also, it can just speed up the process, particularly with federal FOIAs. Like there are agencies, we're suing one agency now that has a backlog of FOIAs because of COVID, and there were a ton of FOIAs filed during COVID, but they haven't increased their FOIA staff, and they keep making the argument that we just have so many FOIAs, we can't do anything. It's going to take, 2 years. And we want the information, and we know if we sue, then that will put it in a different track. And then obviously look at the exemptions that are cited and whether or not they apply. A lot of times agencies will try to shoehorn an exemption and make it applicable to a case where it just simply doesn't happen, or it doesn't fit. So the story that I have up there is one where actually I sued for information, got the information, and then 5 years later wrote the story about that information. So basically, I wanted to find out where police officers were moving in Virginia. I just wanted to see officer movement. Like, they're in one department, they're in another department. When did they move? Why did they move? And I found out, there's a training database where they kind of have to track all that, because they track, who's trained, what officers have what training in what department. So I worked with the state agency that had this data, actually got them we agreed to kind of we signed a contract with them basically saying we wouldn't use this information unless we had it from another source, but to use it as sort of a guidepost. We signed it, and then the agency started talking to local police departments who did not want us to have that information, refused to give it to us, and we took them to court and won. And a couple of years later, I finally got a story out of it, actually after requesting the information again, because the first time they gave it to me, it was they didn't give me a unique identifying field, which was a lesson of my own on doing these. Always ask for a unique identifier. So that's pretty much my talk. Thank you all, and I'll be around if you have any FOIA questions.